Hello and welcome once again to episode 107 of Code Completion. We're a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So, as last week was very chaotic, this week seems to be less chaotic, so that's good. But the EU has not changed and is still mandating more things. So what are they mandating this time?
Yeah, hot off the heels of last week's USB-C thing, they are now mandating that Apple, and I think probably anyone, but I think it's really probably directed at Apple.
You have to have a billion customers. So it's anyone except only Apple, Facebook. There's like some stipulation there that like very narrowly like constrains the law to very specific entities. But basically, that is like, a tactic. Yeah.
But basically FANG.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's to allow other app stores side loading as well as iMessage interoperability. So they're kind of going for a trifecta there, along with last week's USB-C stuff. So yeah, there's that, which I think is interesting. Maybe they thought, after they got the USB-C thing to go through, Marques Brownlee had a really good video on like why they were very tactical in their wording of like being forced to comply with the last week's ruling, but we'll post a video about it. But he basically goes into like they could comply by just not having any port at all. Like in the wording it says charging specifically with a cable or something like that. So there's ways to get around that. Anyway, I don't know if there's ways to get around this one, but the whole thing is that it makes that gatekeeper criteria and basically makes them open up their services to be more, I guess, inclusive, ? Is like what they're going for. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is just gonna add more rampant like scammy stuff, but that's just my pessimism. Like, I think that the App Store has been great for computing because it has simplified and allowed anyone to trust a device where previously that has been a hot mess. And like there are still rampant problems on the web, and to a lesser extent like on the App Store, like they do exist, but they are much smaller, even though the App Store is such a big thing. And being forced to allow it for any App Store might just allow the Facebook App Store to just be a thing, which is even worse than the current like scenario. Because Facebook will allow everyone to like join, but then have like very creepy requirements of those apps to also share everything with Facebook. So that is like the doomsday scenario that comes out of this, and I'm not optimistic that that's like the only that won't happen, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate companies like Facebook that could make their own app store, but then there could also just be sort of more of a well, I mean, I guess they include side loading in that, so it doesn't even need to be an app store where I think there's the time and place for side loading. Like, for example, if you want to throw an emulator on your phone, you can do that. It's on GitHub. You can just go do that. I think that's fine. But the idea of side loading any app is definitely scary. And I think this is like the 4th or 5th time we've talked about this. We had a whole saga when the Epic versus Apple thing went on. So
some might call it an epic.
Yeah, there you go. I think there are benefits, but there are very few as compared to the potential downsides that could happen with like I didn't even consider a Facebook App Store. That's super scary. I thought just like on the
because everyone would download it. Oh, if it's just Facebook, I'll download it. The Meta
dude.
App Store.
Oh my gosh, dude, that's so much worse. But you've got like on the Android side, you've got like the Play Store, but then you also have the Samsung Galaxy Store, and Amazon I think has one. So it's like They do that, and that's fine. There's multiple app stores, and I guess it works or whatever. I don't have an Android device, so I don't really know what the whole deal with those are. Um, but yeah, if like
That
Facebook makes one, or
that said, wouldn't that force Samsung to also allow the Amazon one on Samsung devices like very easily?
yeah,
Which
I
I
think
don't think is the
Amazon
case.
is. I think Amazon is the worst. Where like on their Fire devices, there you have to like jailbreak the device to even get any other app store, unless
Hmm.
you know like you have to sideload it basically. Sideload the app store so you can get other apps. Yeah, so I guess that would work for them too. But I think obviously their main kind of uh, entity that they're going after is definitely Apple, as they are the most lockdown gatekeeper.
Hmm. And this always comes off as like very bizarre to me because for the most part, this is not helping the little person. It's helping very large corporations continue to make money. And that's like who is rooting for these changes for the most part. I'm not saying that small developers are not rooting for the App Store to be more open as a result of
Mm.
this. That's the ideal that we want, though. We want the App Store itself to be more open and less regulated, not that it just allows for any other app store. And yeah, that's what this is not really dealing with in any capacity, and that's the unfortunate part. That it's just a sledgehammer of law that's just going to open things up, but maybe that forces Apple to be more competitive. And that's the good side of this.
Mm-hmm.
The bad side of this is a bunch of people are going to end up downloading the Meta App Store or whatnot. And you're just going to further entrench other ginormous companies and not really like solve the underlying issue, except as a side effect of that if Apple cares to be competitive in that space. So that's the biggest like worrisome aspect for me. And not to mention, like, I don't know about any of you, our listeners, but I am the tech support person of the family and of
Yeah.
friends. And, like, needing to deal with this just sounds like a headache. I've had, like, a good 15 years of peace thanks to the App Store, other than, like, the every now and then of, like, oh, Microsoft called me on the phone and now my computer is hacked. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And like that still happens, but only on computers. It doesn't happen on iOS devices.
Yeah.
So that's like the part that I'm really not looking forward to as a direct result of this, and I can like I'll be the first to let everyone know when it happens, because I think it will be funny and ironic in that sense. But here's hoping that because of this, Apple will open up like their restrictions significantly, and have it be a better place for developers to publish their apps. And it's this lack of competition that has forced them into this current scenario where they just want to make more money from services revenue or ad revenue or whatever,
Yeah.
and not actually improve the situation at all. So I guess they kind of force this on themselves. There's a chance this only happens in Europe, and it's like it's not something that happens in the US. Like that's totally possible. That said, WhatsApp is owned by Meta, and that is like primarily in Europe. So like that is something that can further entrench things for Europeans, which might not end up being good at all. So we'll see. That said, none of this takes effect until like May of 2023, and
Mm-hmm.
then there are 2 months for like everyone to actually put it in place. So what I expect is at Dub Dub in June of 2023, Apple says, "Oh, and we're opening this and doing this and yada yada yada." And they will like pay the fees or whatever until it launches in December
Yeah.
of 2023 or whatnot. So I'm sure they will like make a deal that's going to like work out for them. But expect to hear about this by then and not really in between because it's going to need a new OS release anyways. And we'll see if old OS releases need to be patched. I don't think they
Mm-hmm.
do. Most of these regulations tend to be like for further products. So
Yeah.
existing products are kind of uh, grandfathered in, so to speak. So yeah. That said, there is the messaging framework side of this, and of course, the Mac
Yes.
Rumors article that we Link to is focusing on iMessage, which is hilarious because iMessage is really not a thing in Europe. It's mostly all like WhatsApp and stuff like that.
Right.
So maybe this is a bad thing for WhatsApp and a great thing for iMessage, because that means that you can finally use your iPhone's messaging service with all of these WhatsApp people and not need to use WhatsApp on your actual device. So I can see that being beneficial for Apple, especially if they only need to do it in Europe, right? Like, I don't know if the EU is targeting Facebook or Meta, sorry, in this scenario. But it really doesn't seem like a bad thing for Apple.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember when it was, just probably a couple months ago, when Google kind of had that ad campaign about just like, the green bubbles, right? And they were like super kind of hitting Apple hard about not supporting what is it, RTS or something?
Mm-hmm.
The
Isn't
rich
that
tech
US only,
service.
though?
I don't know, but I know that they were, just like, hey, Apple support this, make iMessage interoperable with this. So there's that side of it where, for whatever reason, I don't quite know why Apple. I mean, honestly, I'm all in favor for the messaging thing. I don't really understand why Apple's so reluctant to kind of not support it. I mean, iMessage has like some things like stickers or whatever that wouldn't be supported. So I don't know if like there's that side of it or whatever, but um, yeah, it would be nice. I don't like, in the US we don't really use WhatsApp, but like I'm in uh, a Smash Brothers chat group with Fernando and his friends in Mexico. There's like 16 of them, and they're all in Mexico and they all use WhatsApp. And in Argentina they use WhatsApp, and I think that's pretty common for like all of Latin America and definitely for the EU. So I know that like in China they use like WeChat. My dad uses that for work and stuff. So kind of having this interoperability would be nice, because I just like the messages app, and whenever I go into WhatsApp I'm like, I don't understand what this is. So there's that kind of learning curve side of it. So having that all in a work well together would be nice.
Do you think we'll get a new message color, bubble color, for these
Like
interoperable ones? So we have
purple.
black for like the business stuff, right? I think it's like black and white. Then we have blue for iMessage. We have green for ancient SMSs, and I guess purple for
Oh,
interoperable messages.
I think Facebook uses purple for their messenger apps, so maybe not.
Well, then maybe that's like directly linking to it, or maybe they'll
Orange.
pick a pukey color.
Yeah,
Um,
brown.
this is what you get for interoperability. No, so kidding aside, I really do think that this could be good for Apple, especially
Yeah.
if it's only in the rest of the world that they enable it. Apple has directly revealed via their emails like the scummy reasons why iMessage is not more open, and that's because, hey, if it were more open, then there's no reason for parents to get their kids iPhones. They could just get them the cheaper like carrier supplied phones, and then you can communicate them, and then it wouldn't be an issue. Because parents want iPhones, but they don't want to necessarily spend that kind of money
Yeah.
on their kids, which is a great thing for Apple, because that means that like devices stay in circulation longer and don't necessarily get resold and all that. So like there is that giant aspect of it, which is scummy because it's just Apple trying to make money.
Make more
and
money.
yeah. So yeah, they're not required by this law to do this anywhere other than in Europe, so we'll see. But I think for Europe specifically, it can help them greatly, which is going to be super ironic that is the case. Maybe it's tied down to the model of phone that is sold, so it's not even like a software thing.
Yeah,
That
it could
be
be
interesting. Going down our list of topics, next we have Swift ownership modifiers. So something is changing about Swift, the language, and this is to make it work better in high performance situations. So when you want to make sure that performance is guaranteed, which you can't really make sure, you can mess around with a lot to like coerce it into the state, but you can't just like assume that Swift is going to be a high performance language, because it does take a lot of shortcuts on your, or it doesn't take shortcuts. It allows you to take shortcuts and does all the hard work for you, so that way you
Right.
can have easy to read code and so on and so forth. But that means that a lot of things that you take for granted can't be done automatically by the compiler to increase performance. And one of the big areas of this are move-only types. So basically, think of having a struct that's currently on your stack, right? And you want to pass it to something else. A move-only type will allow you to pass it to something else without making a copy. And that means that something else can operate on it safely in a way that you're not going to have to do any arc retains and releases. You're not going to have to copy that data anywhere. And it can stay in memory where it is. And you can go ahead and do everything that you need to do. And nothing bad will happen as a result of that. So it's adding a bunch of modifiers and stuff to the compiler, so that way the compiler can help you not shoot yourself in the foot. This is entirely possible in C and in C++, but again, shoot yourself in the foot is something that you can do really, really easily. So we have two proposals that are basically doing the first steps here. And this includes adding a take and a borrow keyword and a take operator to the language, so that way you can more tightly control when those retains and releases happen for reference types, and as a result, copies for value types. Blah. It does not guarantee all of these things. Like, copies may still happen and retains may still happen when they need to, but this gives you a lot more control over that process. So let's take a look at the take keyword first. So you can put this in a function in a function declaration where you have like two arguments, A and B, for instance, and you might say you want to take A, and what this does is it allows you to take A from the caller's side to the point where the caller can no longer modify that argument that they passed in, and that allows the function that is taking A to work on it exclusively and not have anyone else mess with it. This means that from a memory point of view, it doesn't need to copy and it doesn't need to retain A in the reference pointed scenario. So it can do stuff very effectively with it, and it can skip moving memory around, which is oftentimes the biggest problem with most of these operations, especially when you're dealing with like high data throughput networking. Those are the main scenarios that this is dealing with. The second one is borrow, and borrow is the opposite. It basically says that, hey, we're going to borrow this value, but we're not going to retain it ourselves, which means that we expect you to keep it alive while we use it. And that's another reasonable thing that like you could have done easily in Objective-C pre-arc and just don't retain it. But you need to make sure like, the caller is keeping it alive that whole time, and it's not just letting it go poof. So borrow is basically what the defaults like how arc works, but by putting borrow, anytime that default is broken, possibly due to a take and stuff like that, that can warn you, and that can throw an error when you compile. So annotating high performance code with borrow, like it wouldn't necessarily do anything, but it could help as a safeguard for when that default case is broken down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot to unpack here, and I remember seeing this very briefly, like a week or two ago, maybe, if I remember right. But yeah, I didn't really get too far into it. So I don't even know where to start with this. So okay, so like let's go with borrow first. So if maybe I think kind of that last bit that you said maybe isn't quite the case. So let me see if I understand this right. If you have like a global variable somewhere and you want to borrow that, is it almost like you're making a reference to it?
Yeah.
even if it's
Exactly.
a struct, like you're not making a copy, obviously. Wait, you no, or now I'm confused. Is the
So
borrow
you
where you
might
do
still
make?
make a copy. It's not necessarily an in out. This is strictly for like the arc semantics, I would say, and that's
Okay.
where these two keywords are really important. But you can have a struct with reference types, right? And that
Mhm.
borrow would nestle down to those. So any array, for instance, has an underlying reference to the actual buffer.
Yeah.
And your array is a very small thing. It's basically like, hey, my buffer's over there and I'm this big. That's the array struct. So very tiny. And the buffer can be many gigabytes in size, for instance.
Sure.
So that is never going to fit on a stack or anything. So it's somewhere else in memory. And borrow will basically say like, hey, when you make a copy of that array, don't make a copy to that reference once you start messing with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's where borrow can come in. It doesn't mean that a copy won't be made. It just means that the references that are involved won't be retained along the way.
Okay. So with take, let's say you have that global variable and you call take on that. That means you're literally taking the ownership away from like the global
Yeah, that
whatever.
global variable does not exist anymore.
And so what happens if you try to access it? Does it crash?
No, so it will throw an error anytime your code tries to access it from that point forward.
Oh, it's like super safe. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
which
that's
means
cool.
that the compiler can go ahead and say like, hey, this global is probably a bad example, but say a local
Sure. Okay.
variable, right?
Yeah.
So you have a local variable x that does something, and you want a function to take it. So you can go and say, do my func open parentheses take x close parentheses, and that function in its declaration also has take in it. So it says that it can also semi-implicitly take it
Mhm.
whenever it can, which it won't always do. So that's a separate detail of this. But what take does is after that function call, you cannot use x anymore. And that means that it will go ahead and prevent you from using x, so that way you can't shoot yourself in the foot because you
Mhm.
just pass ownership permanently to this function. So that function is the sole owner of take. No retains were made. Everything is just shuffled along towards that other function, and it can do what it needs to do. So on its own, this doesn't really do much for value types like explicitly, but it sets the stage for move only types, which would be value types that don't move or that don't get copied. They would only
Sure.
move from different contexts one after the other. And a very like obvious way to think about this is, say you have three strings with plus operators in between them, right? A plus operator is a function in Swift, like all operators are, with two arguments, the pre and the post argument, or the left-hand side and the right-hand side, as they're colloquially known. And it will need to copy the left-hand side and
Yeah.
copy the right-hand side and then make a new string. And every plus operator that he adds, it basically quadratically makes the situation work, right? Whereas the take operator can go ahead and take exclusive access to that first one and then just add to it. Wherever the buffer has enough space, you can just continue to just move the data in linear time. And that can drastically improve the performance of even simple, stupid code that the user might not even been thinking about. It's like, hey, I have three strings. Let me use the plus operator everywhere. And then they didn't really know that they were doing some silly code by using the plus operator, especially if they had large strings, for instance. So with take, you can put take in front of each one of your strings with the plus operator, and that will make it explicit that, hey, you're not going to use this variable anymore from that point forward. So let's skip the part where we're going to copy it when we'll just use it directly.
Okay. And I guess I assume this is the case, but you could continue to take down the line. Like if you have multiple function calls, it takes something, then you call a function in that function that takes that same variable. You can keep going down like that.
Yeah,
To
as long
keep
as
passing
whoever has the
ownership.
exclusive access can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So yeah, it's a little complex, but it will be very important for Swift, especially in high performance situations. Like, hey, if you want to run a server with Swift currently does okay, but it's not the
Yeah.
most highest performance way of running a server. And it does poorly on those benchmarks because it is doing a lot to make sure that the coding experience is really good. So with this, you can approach the performance of Go or of Rust or of C++ or of C because you can use the nice higher levelness of Swift, but also use the compiler that's going to help you not make any mistakes by annotating things correctly. And then you're no longer copying your buffers back and forth. You just have that one buffer that came in from the network and you're doing all your operations on it. And it never accidentally gets copied from that point forward. So that's where the real benefit of something like this is.
Very cool. Very cool.
That said, Swift.org has a new Swift Evolution page, and I recommend that everyone check it out because it's much nicer than anything that was previously available, like going to the GitHub and then just like sifting through the evolution proposals. This new page is like much nicer, so do check it out. It's at swift.org/swift-evolution. And they basically have everything that is currently in review, everything that has gone through review, and this is something that I will probably be checking weekly, so that way we can pick something to talk about that is changing in Swift. I don't know if any of this stuff is going to make it into Swift 5.8 or 5.9, or if it's a Swift 6 thing. Sure. These are all just like stepping stones to get to that like ideal of having move only types, which is like a big endeavor from everyone involved. So I thought this was an interesting like introduction to that idea, even though most people will probably never need to use it. Do check out the Swift Evolution site because there are some like frankly useful like proposals that come in, like if let syntax got recently changed for the better.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely go check that out.
Cool. Yeah, it's nice. You can search, you can filter by different statuses, whether it's implemented, whether it's an active review or rejected, I guess, if you wanted to look at those. So it's way nicer than just looking through GitHub.
Yeah, which was a hot mess previously.
Yep.
That takes us to our last item for today, and that is Apple has changed their in-app purchase rules yet again on the hot heels of all things that are happening. And they decided that the act of paying for advertisement in an app can be subject to in-app purchases. And they explicitly call out the idea that you can boost a post. So for instance, you have a social media app. I'm sure plenty of people have their own social media apps, right? And you have an advertising company around that social media app. And you want to let users say like, hey, I want more people to see what I just wrote about or took a picture of. And therefore you can pay money to that social media platform through the app to boost that post. Currently you could, or not currently, but previously you could get away with asking for a credit card and doing this all like through your payment processor and having full control over this. However, Apple has changed their mind and said that, hey, if this is an app that's dedicated to showing advertisements on other platforms, sure, you can do that with the credit card. But if your app is the same app that you're boosting in and viewing the ad that you just like boosted in, then you got to use in-app purchases. This means that if you have an app that has advertisements and you want to sell advertisements in that app for that app, then you'd have to use in-app purchases. And yeah, from a user point of view, this is nicer. From a developer point of view, this is scummy because you lose out on 30%, I guess. But the only people this is really going to hurt are the giant corporations where that 30% is something that's going to really annoy them. And that is basically only Facebook. Meta. / Instagram. So that's clearly what this is targeted towards. I don't know why they decided to pick this fight now, but they are picking it and they have implemented it. And it is a thing.
Yeah. My first thought was definitely going to hit Facebook. I know you can like sponsor posts, but like the only reason I have a Facebook account, well, I have two reasons, but the main one is the Facebook marketplace is like kind of where like, I don't know, classifieds are like a pretty big, like buying used stuff off of people in Utah is like pretty big. there's a like a local news website that was kind of the go-to for classifieds, but a lot more people are moving to the Facebook marketplace to do that. So you want to buy or sell anything, that's kind of the place you have to do it, unfortunately. But you can also like promote like, hey, I'm selling this thing, and promote your listing above other people's. So that I mean, in one sense, like, I don't know, I'm kind of like, good job, Apple, for like screwing Facebook over more and more. Like, I think that's kind of funny. But in the article, it mentions like Bumble, for example, like, I guess promoting yourself over other people for dating.
But that's something they were already doing. They were already paying the in-app purchase fees.
Oh, they were.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Okay. Yeah, interesting. I don't know. I think, is it like, it's like 30% still? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it could be 15 if it's a subscription. I
guess.
Yeah, like more and more stuff ended up being 15, right? So if you were a small developer, it would be 15.
Yeah.
Talking about small developers, I don't know if anyone was part of that class action lawsuit for the small developers app assistance fund thingy. But check your mail, because I got my check for that, and I was pleasantly surprised. So if you are a small developer that has like had apps on the App Store since like 2015, I think was the time period for that, do check your snail mail. If you're like me and you just kind of ignore it for the most part and check it like once a month for bills, then that's something that you might want to take a look at. You might have a nice check in there. But yeah,
it's probably too late for me to do anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you would have had to like say you were part of. Like, do you have to sign up for it? I think it was just,
I don't know. I was getting the emails for a while. I just never did anything about it.
Then double check those emails, because maybe it's not too late.
Cool.
This is the only advice I can send over. Or maybe because so many people didn't do anything, then I got a bigger check. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it was based on how much money you made in that time period. I think like I barely hit like the lowest category, which would give me like $500 or something. So it'd be kind of
yeah.
Nice.
I honestly don't know how they calculated it, because this might be like equal or more money than I made, which is surprising. Because during that time period, I really didn't do any App Store development for the most part. So that was purely like any residual stuff as I entered into full-time work.
Right.
So it was surprising nonetheless.
Cool.
But yeah, so I don't know. I guess if you have ads in your app, then take a look at this rule. That might be a sweet solution if you do have ads in your app, just to offer an in-app purchase for people to advertise there, especially when the fill rate is low. You can just say like, hey, want to advertise here? Click here. And then you can go ahead and just like upload an ad to the users of your app. So
I guess that would affect like Overcast would be another one.
If they don't sell it in the app though. Overcast sells it on their website. Yeah.
Oh.
It's purely the stuff that's sold in the app.
Okay, so you can get around it, sort of. Okay.
Yeah. It's just it's squarely targeting like Instagram for the practice, and I guess Twitter as well for the practice. Yeah. Oh, maybe this is why it's coming in, because Elon Musk bought Twitter, and that's a whole fiasco. So any way to get in on it while the going's good, I guess.
Yeah,
I see people mass leaving Twitter, so maybe that's not a good situation, but we'll see.
Do you ever think Apple's gonna like make their own social network?
They have many times. Don't you remember Ping?
I don't. That may have been before my time.
So Ping was a social network they started on iTunes, where you can follow your favorite artists and get pinged.
Oh, well. I think you can still do that.
Oh, they brought it back, but it was initially called Ping, and it was it was a very silly thing. I guess technically the first versions of like iTools and .Mac and MobileMe count as semi social networks, because you were able to have like your own website and stuff like that. So it's not a social network by today's standard, but it could have been considered a nascent one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been interesting if Apple like bought Twitter and stuff like that when that was in the talks several years or dozens of years ago. I don't. It's been a hot while since that has happened. But yeah, I don't think Apple knows what they would be doing owning a social network. So maybe
Probably
it's
not.
better
That might
they
be
don't.
too much. That's maybe too much like antitrust stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be good for a privacy conscious company to run a social network. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
But it has to be someone other than Apple at this point, I would say.
Yeah.
I guess iMessage is a social network. Think about it.
I suppose so.
It's the number one social network in the US.
Not for long if
for long.
the EU has anything to say about it.
This week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Not Pho. Tired of eating the same old meals time and time again? Consider Vietnamese food. You might already know pho, but there are a ton of other flavors specific to Vietnamese cuisine that are sadly not well known around the world. This includes everything from sandwiches like banh mi, rice plates like com tam, and even the deliciously savory crepes known as bánh xèo. That's where the app Not Pho comes in. It's a free-to-try app dedicated to teaching you more about the wonders behind Vietnamese cuisine, brought to life with colorful and interactive illustrations and animations. Learn how to make many classic Vietnamese flavors at home, but even if you don't cook, you'll know how to order like a pro the next time you visit your local Vietnamese restaurant. Recently new is version 1.2, which brought a brand new home screen to the app featuring a recipe of the week and a map of Vietnam, allowing you to explore recipes by region as well. Thanks again to Not Pho for sponsoring our show. Search for Not Pho, that's N-O-T space P-H-O, on the App Store today to give it a try completely for free. So Spencer, I got a code completion tip for you. Do you still use auto layout?
Yes, in parts of our app, yes.
And whenever you do use auto layout, do you use the anchor based system to go ahead and make some nice auto layout lines, like a leading anchor dot constraints equal to
depends.
super dot trailing anchor?
Yeah, I haven't actually written any constraints. It's usually just messing with the ones we have. But yes, I definitely in my own stuff, I'll use anchors instead of just the like 8 parameter initializer for NS layout constraint.
Yeah, no one should use those.
No.
So I expect most people likely use the anchors because it makes things so much easier. But did you know that when you do use the anchors, like you would say like, hey, my view dot leading anchor dot constraint equal to super view dot trailing anchor, whatever equation you have, and then at the end you have to have dot is active equals true to enable that constraint that you just created. Well, it turns out that if you have several lines of those, which you likely do because you have to set up like the x on each side, 2 dimensions for the x, 2 dimensions for the y, and you end up with like a big bundle of constraints. It turns out it's really ineffective to write dot is active equals true 4 times because you're basically relaying out everything every single time you add a constraint. So it's more efficient to use NSLayout constraint.activate, which is a static class method that will take an array of constraints and activate them all at once. So that way you can go ahead and build out all your constraints, and then you say like put them in place, and then it puts them in place in one go, and it can reuse and any caches and stuff like that. So that's the tip for this week, is to use NSLayout constraint.activate. Ideally only once per configuration of constraints. So if you have a lot of views, add all your views to your hierarchy, and then afterwards at the bottom have a giant NSLayout.activate call that takes an array, and in that array you can go ahead and have like groups with comments that like say, hey, this is for this view, this is for this view, and that should make it a lot easier. A secondary tip, I guess, is anytime you like write these things out, I am super dyslexic, so I always get confused. Like, hey, if I say my subview.leading is equal to constraint of the superview.leading plus 5, what does that mean? Like, where's the 5? Is it in between? Is it like going in the negative direction? How does that work for trailing? The leading usually makes sense, and then the trailing is like 5, and then like overshoots by 5, and that's like not at all what someone wants. So a quick tip for that is it's kind of like an equality operator. So when you say subview.leading equals superview.leading, you're saying that the superview.leading plus 5 is where the subview.leading is going to end up. So for trailing, you would need to do the opposite. You would need to say superview.trailing is equal to the subview.trailing plus 5 ends up at your superview.trailing. So if you've always gotten confused with the pluses and minuses, it makes sense to switch the arguments and think of the dot constraint equal to as an equality. And that can make it a little easier to reason with. Unless I got all that wrong and it's actually the opposite. Who knows? I am very dyslexic, so don't trust me.
Cool.
That's why that part was a secondary tip.
No, that's great. Sub tip. Yeah, I've been using the NS layout constraint to activate for a while in my own stuff, mostly because I thought it was like easier to write. I didn't know there was like a performance benefit to it. So that's cool. I guess that makes sense though if it has to recalculate or all of the layout of views every time you call dot is active equals true. So
yeah, I don't know if it's recalculating all that, but it's like reflashing all the caches at the very least. So it's not doing a layout pass necessarily, but doing a what's that called? A linear arithmetic caching pass that like actually builds up the actual like equations for all that. And that's what it's doing more efficiently, because you can take all those equations at once and make things a lot more effective.
Cool. That's awesome. Back in the land of UIKit.
Yeah. So if you're still stuck in UIKit, definitely consider using that. It will make your apps ever so slightly faster, especially if you like mess with constraints a lot. But if you don't mess with constraints, you might be like, well, I see no difference in implementing this. Well, your battery life might see a minor difference of doing this, especially if users force quit your app every single time they use them and then reopen them afterwards. This might make things ever so slightly more performant and better on the battery, so that way your app can run for longer. So that's a minor win in that regard for that. Sure. Even if you just like enter and exit screens, you're rebuilding those screens oftentimes, so that can be a benefit there.
Nice.
So this week as well, instead of a mini review corner, we kind of have a max review corner. And not max as in Macintosh, but max as in maximum, because as I mentioned loosely in last week's what do we call it?
Commented out.
Last week's commented out. My brain is farting afterwards after all that auto layout stuff. But after last week's commented out, I previewed that I got a bunch of Ubiquiti gear, and I wanted to overhaul my home network, and I spent a silly amount of money on that, but I think it's worth it because I spent a silly amount of money on that. So we will see after I discuss all this if it actually was or not. So I have a few devices in this office that have 10 gigabit Ethernet. So it's currently this like iMac, the Mac Studio that's somewhere over there, and a Mac Mini that's off screen that has a big chunkin hard drive connected to it, which I colloquially call Chunky Boy because it is a big hard drive. And all three of those have 10 gigabit Ethernet. However, 10 gigabit Ethernet is kind of relegated to my office because I have one 10 gigabit Ethernet switch that will just connect those three devices to the rest of my network. And that means nothing else can take advantage of faster than 1 gigabit speeds. This is combined with the fact that throughout the house I have a bunch of Airport Extremes, one of which you can see here. And I have, I think, 4 of them, or 5 of them throughout the house. And these have done a pretty good job at supporting our like wireless needs up until today. However, they kind of ran into some more and more like big issues ever since 1, our internet dropped out for several hours, and 2, we kept buying more HomeKit cameras. And it turns out that these devices worked great when you have like a dozen devices on them each. But when you are passing 100 devices on your network, especially on your wireless network, the routing capabilities tend to suffer a little. And the main Airport Extreme, that's the router that would have to do the bulk of like the shuffling of data, tended to start dropping packets and otherwise being a hot mess. So between all the switches and air quality monitors and other HomeKit stuff, cameras, and then all of our iPhones and iPads and computers and anything else that uses Wi-Fi, HomePods, we were definitely passing that 100 client limit and really taxing the Airport Extreme. So I needed to do something to kind of fix this. And then my final reason, other than I really wanted to do this because I'm a geeky person and this sounded like fun, but my reason, quote unquote, is I really want fiber internet, and this is my way of like manifesting it into my life because AT&T won't offer it yet. And every time I call them, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's not there yet. 6 to 8 months, kind of thing. Check back." So I want to manifest fiber internet into my life, and this is one way of doing it by having a switch capable of fiber internet. I did later learn that in ultimate irony, the fiber that AT&T sells has to have a modem, so the fiber goes into a modem. And then that modem has 5 gigabit Ethernet coming out of it. So I need like I would have been okay with a switch that had 10 gigabit Ethernet as like the main router or the main switch for that. But that's not an excuse to get new toys. So I didn't go with that.
Now your router has a cool 1-inch touchscreen on it.
It does, and the AR still does not work for me. I will ask you about that later. But talking about equipment, so I got a Unified Dream Machine Pro SE, whatever they want to call it. That's the big chunkin' rack-mounted thing that I don't have a rack for, so it's just like on a dining room like shelf. You could say. So it's nice there. I didn't put the side mounts on it, so it looks like a standalone console kind of thing. Think of a big long Blu-ray player, kind of similar.
Yeah.
So yeah, got the Unified Dream Machine, and that is now my main router, and that can do like 10 gigabit Ethernet, 10 gigabit internet, just fine. And it also has a bunch of toggles on it to like inspect the traffic coming through, and that brings that down the speed, but I still only have like gigabit barely Ethernet currently, so not a problem for now. I guess I'll try it all out. And that acts as the brains of the Unify like ecosystem, and everything from there will like be part of my network. So the only thing I have currently plugged into that is an aggregation switch, which is way overkill, but has a lot of SFP ports, which are like big empty cavities, if you've never seen this before, where you have a big long metal, and I can show this briefly. You have a big long metal thingy with a circuit board like directly on it, and that just plugs into those cavities, and that's how you plug things in. These modules or transceivers, I think they're called.
I think so.
And these modules basically can do several things. You can have one that has an Ethernet plug like attached to it. You can have one that is directly attached to a cable to another module to connect two devices together. Or you can have one that has a fiber connection that you can plug in a fiber cable to, and then that can go ahead and plug into another one somewhere else. So there's lots of different like kinds of these modules, and that's the point of them. It's very flexible towards anything you want to do. So I got one of those aggregation switches that's connected to the router, that's over in my dining room, and then I have another one of those aggregation switches over here. So those are all those two are connected by a fiber cable, a direct attached fiber cable, which I'll get to later as a funny story. But the one that's connecting both of those sides is 25 gigabits, which sounds really fast from a networking point of view, but it sounds really slow compared to a Thunderbolt point of view. So take that for what it's worth. I could technically put 4 of these cables and then have 100 gigabits. But that means 4 cables, and these are very finicky cables, and I had a lot of heart attacks while installing them, because if you crimp a fiber cable, that's it, it's done. You want to not do that. It's fairly robust, like it won't crimp easily, but if you do crimp it, that's it. So that's something to consider if you are messing around with fiber and installing it around your house. You can get really fast speeds, and if you don't get the direct attached ones, you actually have a fiber cable and then separate modules. You can update the modules down the line to 100 gigabits, 400 gigabits, 1 terabit, and the cable is the same. So especially for reasonable distances, for 10 kilometers, yes, you have to pick and choose your cables types very carefully, because it turns out 10, 100 kilometers, it's a long distance. You need some pretty beefy lasers for those, and the cable itself is going to be a lot larger, like the core of the fiber, to better do that. I think it's actually smaller, but any case, it's a lot more nuanced than just like splicing together some cheap fiber cable. But the fiber cable that you can put in your home or in an office, that stuff is very cheap. Yeah, 2 aggregation switches, and then from those aggregation switches, I have all sorts of stuff connected to some PoE switches that will go ahead and give power over Ethernet to each side. Basically, on this side, I have some Ethernet 10 gigabit modules to plug into that. I'm gonna keep saying modules because the word transceiver
that's not fun.
It gets confusing in my head with like transducer and all that. So I get some 10 gigabit Ethernet modules for those, and that's connecting to actual computers because those don't have fiber. Turns out you can get Thunderbolt 25 gigabit fiber like conversion boxes for your computers. They cost a hot $1,500. I did not opt for that, but you can if you really want. That is something that Thunderbolt supports. I think 40 gigabit ones are also available, but that's like a different module. These are SFP or SFP28 modules. They're all like intracompatible. SFP, SFP Plus, and SFP28. That's like one module size. And then there's a bigger module, which is Quad SFP Plus, and then Quad SFP28. And that's the one that can hit 100 gigabits. So I think Quad SFP Plus, that one is at 25. No, that one's at 40 gigabits. And then the Quad SFP28, that one's at 100 gigabits. So
is it like 4 fiber cables?
No, but I think it might. It's either 4 actual like transmission lights. So you have 4 wavelengths, and that's how you just get more. But the actual plug is larger to have more lanes for communication. So it's as if you had 4 SFP ports in one. That's basically what it's simulating. And then there's a whole bunch of modules out there. It's like really confusing. There's bidirectional modules. So you have 1 fiber cable. Like this might look like 1 fiber cable, but there's actually 2 fiber cores in it, like a send and a receive. Whereas the bidirectional one will have like a half silvered mirror with 1 wavelength on one side and another wavelength on the other. And that means that you can have 1 core have both wavelengths of light, and those wavelengths of light are being like, hey, I don't like, we don't interfere with each other, so we're just gonna zoom by each other, and that's gonna be fine. And then like the 400 gigabit, like all that is way out of scope for this, but they operate on the same principle. You just add more and more wavelengths of light, and you can communicate with more and more data at once that isn't interfering with each other. So
that's crazy.
Long story short, got a nice decent network in place. It's mostly entirely installed to each PoE switch. I have one of those Unify UFOs, which are the access points that give you Wi-Fi. Like that's the key piece that without everything else, it's like, well, all those 100 clients on my network can't actually connect to anything. And these are fairly large. It's like this big as a circle. Do I have one? I have a box of one. So to give you an idea, it's a big honking circle. They're very heavy and very solid. I did drop one and couldn't hear anything rattling on the inside, so A+ nice. To that. I also have bouncy floors a little bit, so like that might have saved it. But
is it the U6 Pro?
This is the U6 Enterprise, which is the first one that supports 6G.
I see.
I have a single 6G capable device in my home, and that is the new iPad. and I needed to be able to support that, right?
Of course.
Yeah, so the other difference between this one is even though you don't need 6G for faster than gigabit speeds, this is the only access point that they sell that has 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, which allows it to not only allow for faster than gigabit between wireless devices, but also allow faster than gigabit for that device to the network. So I've seen on the iPad, for instance, a max transmit of 2.4 like gigabits per second. And that's the transmit power and the receive power. So that's not actually your throughput, but that translates roughly to 1.5 gigabit, 1.8 gigabits. You're thinking about roughly half of whatever that says. That's what you're actually going to be able to get in ideal scenarios.
Right.
So that is all like super fast 6G. The only thing it adds is a whole bunch more spectrum that is currently unused by anything.
Right.
So that's the ideal. If you do want to get these fast speeds, do note that you need to like go into the Unify thing and configure your Wi-Fi to use the wide bands. Currently, it's all like by default they're all the way at the bottom, and therefore there's like no wideband support. So you need to tell your access points, hey, go ahead and use 160 megahertz bands. There's like 3 of them in 5 gigabit and like another 3 in 6 gigabit. So not a whole amount of devices can use these at once, but when you do, that's when you get the crazy speeds. So
and it's also even shorter range than 5 gigabit. So it'd be like, I don't even know how well it would penetrate a wall. Probably
it doesn't really penetrate walls. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider if you're going that route. If you have a very small house, you probably only need one of these. If you have a larger house with lots of walls, you might want to have, or larger house, lots of walls, lots of devices, you might want to have one per section of your house. That way, every place you plan to use devices regularly, like at an office, can get line of sight to the access point, because line of sight is really what it needs. Your body is a big sack of water that's not going to help it. So that's why they say, hey, install these on the ceiling. That's why they're affectionately known as little UFOs. And that's how you'll get everything. So that's like kind of the hardware setup. It's mostly all set up. And I'm happy there. Lots of nice speeds that I can now get on the local network itself, which is really, really cool. That said, that is only half of the Unify story. The other half is their software. And their software is a web interface that you can log into from your main router. So in this case, my Dream Machine Pro SE, whatever it's called. And that interface is really neat because it gives you a lot of insight into everything that's connected, including a big topology map. If you only have some of the devices connected, so I was using the airports as like bridge devices intermittently as I was getting the fiber all routed, then you will run into some issues like seeing that topology. So don't be alarmed. Once you do switch over entirely to the Unify switches, then it will kind of see everything. It will tell you what ports are connected to what. You can power cycle ports remotely from that thing. And everything seems like really cool and very polished. And that's how I learned I have like 140 devices that are connected. Some of those might be the same device that's connected to multiple like access points. So your phones, for instance, will randomize their IP address, not their IP, their MAC address, which is media access control. I think that's what it stands for. But in any case, it's the unique identifier that every network device has. However, Apple for privacy will say like, hey, if you join network A, you're going to use one MAC address. And if you join network B, you're going to use a different one. So networks A and B can't correlate and say like, oh, Dimitri joined. It's a brand new device. So you can turn that off or you can leave it on. It will just show up as two different devices. So that's something to think about. It'll just be disconnected on one or the other. So if you do have multiple Wi-Fi access points, consider that. Or SSIDs, I think they're more accurately called. So the options in the Wi-Fi menu. You can have multiple from these boxes, which is really, really cool. So it's not just two, like the consumer ones. You can have 8 and really have at it.
Yeah. It's cool. You can like set limits to, like, I guess if you wanted to have 8, you could set like, this has a bandwidth limit of 100 megabits per second or 10 or whatever. It's insanely customizable. I also have recently switched to Unify stuff, although not nearly as baller as as Dimitri. But I got like the Dream Machine pill. It's just like a giant pill looking. It almost looks like a HomePod, um, because it's both a router but also an access point. Um, Before I had like a mesh setup and it didn't work really well. So I have that in kind of my kitchen on my first floor. Behind me, I have an in-wall.
Do those actually go in the wall or just replaces like your wall outlet?
So I had was just an Ethernet port in my wall, and then it just uses PoE. And I had to re-terminate the plug into it. It was in a stupid Keystone jack, and so I just put a normal Ethernet, like an RJ45 jack on it. But the cool part about that is, one, it acts as an AP for my office where most of my stuff is, but also on the bottom of it has, I think this one has 4 Ethernet ports, so you don't
like
necessarily lose that. Yeah, it also acts as a switch, so that's super nice. And then I put a not near as baller UFO in my basement, which is the 6 Lite. It's Wi-Fi 6, but it doesn't have 6 gigahertz. So I only spent like $700 on mine, but works really well. Oh, and I have a one of the PoE switches as well to kind of
what you need for the access point. So if you want to get into the whole thing, you need PoE switches. If you want to get into the baller version, you need baller switches, which is how this gets very expensive very quickly. If you can wire like everything to one switch, that is super ideal because then you only buy one switch. But if you need a wire to like many parts of the house, and then you need many switches to power the access points. Of course, you get stuff out of those switches as well. So in this case, I got the Switch 8 Enterprise, I think it's called. This one has a whole bunch of 2.5 gigabit Ethernet PoE switch ports, and then 2 SFP plus upstream ports. So that's how I'm connecting all the access points. But if you can avoid that, it can be a lot cheaper. So that is something to consider there.
Yeah, I went with the Switch Lite 16 PoE. It's got I think 8 PoE ports. The other 8 are just normal, but it's all gigabit. I'm still on gigabit, which is fine for me. The only time that I really wish I had like 10 gig or even like 2.5 gig is when I'm like moving recordings of this podcast to my NAS. Basically, that's the only time I do like any large file transfers, and they end up being like 10 gigs, and so it
all the raw
takes
files.
a couple minutes. Yeah, but like other than that, it's like it'd be nice, but I'm not ready to spend baller money on it. So, but definitely, I mean, I've been super like I think I mentioned this last time we brought up Unify stuff, but I've gone through 3 different routers in like 3 years basically, and they've all sucked. They all crap out in like 6 months to a year, and this Unify stuff has been rock solid so far, with some slight woes now that I am going to set up a separate network in my basement. But I think that's more of a configuration thing than the actual hardware not working. So if you want to like kind of get your network rock solid, I would highly recommend it. It's been awesome, and it's stupid customizable, and it's cool to see things like the topology, and you can Dimitri did I haven't done it yet, but Dimitri did a thing where you like walk around the house with your phone and you see the Wi-Fi signal and where like dead spots are and stuff. So they do really cool stuff, and it's cool that they make enterprise level stuff, but they've also kind of trickled it down to the average home owner consumer that can take advantage of this stuff if they want to be a little bit more techie and mess around with their network, which I know not everyone wants to do. So
yeah, so props to the Airport Extreme, which is this handy little device. For 2013, sure. I think that these things came out, and they have been rock solid for me, like up until the point where I was like really saturating the wireless capabilities of my home with like, I think I have 9 cameras now. It's, for more on that, you can listen to my other podcast, Explain It Slowly, where we periodically give updates on our cat's medical situation and the other one's behavioral situation. But basically, they pee everywhere, so we have cameras to catch that in action. So we have given up privacy in favor of being able to spot when our cats pee, so that way we can fix the issue or try to fix it, because they're lovable creatures, yet they pee. Because they're creatures
and agents of chaos.
And yep, agents of chaos, absolutely. So I would say that's like something. Oh, one last thing I want to say as far as positives before we get into negatives. The Unify like OS system, like I'm not using any of the protect or access or hit. Like I'm not a small business. I'm a 1-2 person business out of my home. I don't need like people beeping into the office and all that. So I don't really have a use for any of that. So that's that. I have heard like don't turn on auto update for these sorts of things, because Unify has on occasion really messed things up. So it's good to like sit on it for a week and then like see if people say like, hey, you royally messed things up. So turn off auto update on your Unify devices if you can, and then just go in periodically and double check if you want to be safe and not have a headache. But the Unify like software is really, really nice. It gives you topology maps. It gives you lists of all the clients. You can disconnect clients. You can like see history of like how their throughput is happening. You can go ahead and see what those clients are accessing in terms of like internet bandwidth. You can see how your ISP is doing if it detected like high latency or packet loss at the router level, not at the Wi-Fi level. It gives you a whole bunch of data to mess around with your network. You can upload a floor plan, as Spencer said. Like they have a companion app called Wi-Fi Man, which allows you to like test everything from your device. And they have the whole AR mode where I think Apple like added this AR kit recently where you can detect walls and stuff. It uses that, and therefore you can just walk around your home and like build out walls. I recommend doing this, like do one pass of your home. It's going to be very skewed and you're going to see your home like start to distort and overlap in weird ways. Use that as like a plan A, and then as a plan B, like actually scan every room. It turns out every square is 1 square foot, which is really, really nice from like a planning point of view. The only thing is it doesn't export any of these maps. You just got to take a screenshot. I was telling Spencer about this as we started the episode. I don't know if we'll keep it in or not, but you can tap and hold on an image in Photos, and it will kind of like do a quick scan of your image and then like outline a thing, and then you can copy just that. So I copied each individual room to Sketch, and I like re-overlaid everything, and cool. Like redrew everything out, and I now have a nice floor plan in my house. It's reasonably within half a foot accurate. So that was good enough for me to upload into the Unify thing, and you can then just like put all your network stuff and show where it actually is, and I think that was pretty cool. The one built into the Unify OS is not as cool as their Design Center one, where you can actually like put the walls, and then you can drag the access points around and see like how they navigate around doors and all that. So that's so cool. Something that is not in the main one, but I'm sure they'll add it eventually. But it is available if you just go to unify.com. You can log into your Unify thing from externally. You can set up VPN. So it's like really, really cool. Really thoughtful.
Sorry, real quick. So with the VPN thing, it's so cool. That Wi-Fi Man is awesome, because like the only reason I ever want to like have a VPN into my home network is like when I have a 3D print running, I have a Raspberry Pi running just a local server with a camera so I can see it running. But sometimes I'll like be at my parents' house on a Sunday or whatever and be printing something, and I want to make sure it's still printing and not breaking my printer again. Story for another day. But you can just go into that Wi-Fi Man app. It's called Teleport in there. I think you have to set it up in the Dream Machine first, but once you do, it just acts like you're on your home network. So, you know, you could type in 192.whatever, and it would kick you into the Raspberry Pi server, or anything else that you have on your network. You could access, you know, an SMB share or whatever from anywhere. And I guess you could do things like browse the internet safely, and it's all being routed through your home network and stuff. But super cool, and it's free. I think it was in beta. I don't know if it still is, but it works solid. That's like one of my favorite things about this whole Unify stuff is the occasion where I'm not home and I want to get on my home network's devices. So
yeah, I haven't had a chance to try it yet, so I'm excited when I eventually do get to try it. You can log into your Unify console like through their website, but if you do want to have like full access to your network, they make it very easy to set up a VPN from their apps directly. So very cool there. Now for the iffy bits. The iffy bits start with 6G. 6G. Turns out 6G is very new. Who'da thunk? And at least on my iPad, it takes a hot moment for like the iPad to connect to 6G, like 10-15 seconds. So that's something to consider. The second thing to consider is if you enable 6G, you are basically making every device that's on your network inaccessible to it. So make a separate network for your 6G, but also include 2.4 and 5 gigahertz on that separate network. So it's a whole trifecta of like all the spectrums. And you can enable 6G there, but you also have to enable WPA3 and like all the other stuff that comes with it. So it's not a simple like, hey, this is additive. The 6G part is not. The Wi-Fi 6 part is. The 6G part is not. It's a brand new new way of thinking about wireless devices. This means that you can basically ignore the fact that older Wi-Fi devices are never going to connect to it. So you can use the new features like fast roaming and all that. All that can be done on your separate 6G network. Just keep in mind that that is like a different beast than the non-6G network. So I don't know if I'm going to keep using it because every time I like open up my iPad, it's like no internet connectivity, connectivity. And then it works. But it takes a while for it to like do that handshake and key signing. I don't know what it's doing.
Interesting.
But yeah. So that's like my first thing. My second thing is options. You have lots of options. You can shoot yourself in the foot. We like to say with Swift, it's hard to shoot yourself in the foot with Swift. It's easy to shoot yourself in the foot with Ubiquity Gear because they give you all the options that you might ever want, including I want fast roaming. Click and then nothing connects. So like do keep that in mind. All the various Wi-Fi options you should probably leave on auto, like let it do its thing if you want the biggest acceptance. Play around if you want to have a separate 6G network, which is basically only new stuff. Only Wi-Fi 6 capable stuff can go ahead and use that, including 6G and non-6.
Right.
Yeah, Wi-Fi 6E. Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E should support all the options there.
Okay.
So don't let any Wi-Fi 4, which is 802.11g or N, like don't let those devices connect to that network because it's probably just going to be chaos. But any modern Mac, anything that supports Wi-Fi 6, basically, go ahead and use your 6G network or your 6G capable network because it also has 5G and 2.4G. Like don't deselect those. Apple will yell at you if you try to join a network. It's like, hey, I noticed you don't have a 5G and a 2.4G network, and that means that you are going to lose connectivity as soon as you start roaming and you'll switch to a different network.
Yeah, right.
So make sure that that's all selected, but it's a separate network. It'll be WPA3, so that'll be even more secure than the other ones.
Yep.
So benefits all around there. Now for the chaos. I was previously having everything go to Airport Extreme. So I very carefully set up this network where things were bridged through the Airport Extreme, and then I slowly like swapped cables one at a time, and everything was now routed through the Dream Machine, and everything was good. Then I was like, okay, final step. I have all these access points that I hooked up. They're currently not being used. I verified that everything was super awesome on them with an independent test network that I was working with, which I guess I'll pause the story here. Wi-Fi Man seems great until you realize that like the internal Wi-Fi speed tests are kind of bonkers and they are not great.
I don't know why. It's terrible.
Like
I've also noticed that
speed test to the internet was faster than these little things. I have not done an iPerf 3 like test to like actually see everything, but given the transmit and the receive rates, I am reasonably confident that like if you can hit half of that easily, then I have multi-gigabit speed. Even though their Wi-Fi speed test is like, you got 200 megabits, and I do like a Ookla speed test, and I'm like at 960. So I don't really know what's going on there. Like, big asterisk.
I have also experienced that.
I could not find the test flight for Wi-Fi Man, so I don't know if they fixed this. Who knows?
It's been like that as long as I've had Unify stuff, which is maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
So.
Also, talking about the iPhone apps, there's an iOS networking app that basically has every option the web OS does. The web interface does. So that's really cool. There are a few options that are only in the web interface. That's another point. But there's an AR feature in there that I can't get to work. Like, I do the AR scan of like, scan your rack. And then the next step is to scan individual devices. And that just like, the little AR screens just like pause. And I don't know if it's supposed to do that. But like the app does nothing. So I have not been able to try the cool AR thing, which means nothing at the grand scheme of things. Because like I have 5 cables plugged into things. I can see where they're going. They're different colors. But that would be cool one day to be able to use that. Anyways, back to Chaos. The final step of setting up my network was to switch over these Airport Extremes to the new access points. So I needed to add my networks to the access points that all my devices know about already. This seems like an easy thing to do. You go in, you make a new network, you call it whatever the old thing was, you give it whatever the old thing's password was. And you click create. You do the same for guest networks. By the way, if you want to use like airport guest networks, there's like a special VLAN number, which I am forgetting off the top of my head, but I can look up in a little bit, that you need to use. And then the old guest networks will continue to use. Like, these will work with the guest network that the Unify events. Like, turns out these are mini layer 3 switches. Who'd have thunk in 2013?
That's pretty cool.
Like, very limited, but like they do the things with VLANs. So good on you, Apple.
They do the thing.
They do the things. That is title worthy. Yeah, I need to do the final thing, so I add all those networks. The two, actually I have 4, because there's an ancient Airport Extreme, the flat version, the N not AC capable one. I don't know if you remember those, but that one is running very old stuff, but it's connected to a printer, so that one I'm gonna have to keep because printer needs network access. So that is my network dongle for the printer. But that had 2 networks on it too. So I added 4 networks to the thing, and I was like, okay, they are now on the new access points. Now I need to disconnect the old access points. I unplug the ones that are not currently being used as switches. As I'll get to later, this one's still being used as a switch because cabling, and that's just the way it is. But I renamed the access points on those to old with parentheses.
Right.
And it was time for everything to jump on the new access points. They were already on the new network because this was to a new router. And now none of my HomeKit stuff works reliably. So
oh my gosh.
That is my current adventure, I should say. Once again, I spent lots of money on this, so I am like very positive. It's like, oh, it must be me. It's not the device. It's probably the devices. Let's be real. Like I want to look at this positively because I spent lots of money. But in all fairness, the airports were doing a better job. Like once nothing restarted, like once the power didn't flicker or anything, the airports are doing a great job. But as soon as that started happening, they started flaking out. But from the start, this stuff is doing a very poor job. Despite it being way fancier and way more capable. I can restart the HomeKit devices remotely, which is really nice. So I can go and say, like, hey, I'm not going to walk over to you and unplug you anymore. I'm just going to click reconnect, and that's going to drop the connection and force you to reconnect to a new access point. So A+ on that capability. However, like the cameras are dropping offline randomly. And I think this mirrors the problem that you were telling me about, right? Where you installed an access point, and ever since you made a separate network for it, that was going crazy. So maybe it's because I have 3 networks. I made a new like large network for all the main stuff. I made a guest network, and I made a legacy network that had the same IP address range in case anything wanted to hop on that. Turns out nothing is hopping on that, so that's good. But because I have 3 networks, maybe that's why I'm seeing network craziness. I really don't know.
It very well could be. I mean, I sort of very quickly installed that UFO in my basement and set up a separate like guest network for it. And then I noticed that it was really only my phone that I noticed it on, but it would disconnect pretty or I don't know if it would disconnect, but like you would, sit on a like Safari and it would sit there and load web pages if we're back in the 90s. So it was like, there's something wrong here. And I didn't know what it was. And then I realized, it was about the time that I set up that network. So I paused the network and so I made a separate network and I also made a separate SSID. So I don't know if it's both or one of those that's causing the problem. But as soon as I pause both of those, everything's been fine for the last 2 days, which sucks because I need that separate network. I'm going to have people living in my basement and I don't want them to be on my network. So like, I need to figure that out. So I guess the goal of Dimitri and I is going to be together trying to figure out how to get it to work so we can both be happy.
Like, I didn't even get to the point of making, like, an Internet of Tech Devices, like, separate network and all that. Like, that would be step 4 to all of this, is, like, finally move all of those things off the main network. Or at least the ones that do ping the internet, which you can find out now per device, because Unify will tell you. Anything that never pins the internet, I'm not going to bother. But anything that does, then that's something that I'll be like, hey, you are going on a separate network now.
Yeah. It's really interesting with all of the analytics it gives you. It'll give you like a percentage breakdown of how much of your internet traffic's from where, and you'll get like less than 0.0 or 0.1% from like random things like Uber and TikTok that I don't use. And I'm like, oh, I do not like this. This is scary. So yeah, lots of good insights.
Yeah, and you can see where that's coming from. So yay for spying on your family. Don't do that maybe. But it does give you a lot of benefits that if you wanted to set up a network for your kids that has limited speeds when they should be doing their homework, for instance, disengage them from YouTube, for instance, you can totally do that. You can give them 90s internet, like dial-up, and everything will be horrible, and it'll be like, I guess I'll do my homework because YouTube's not loading at reasonable speed. So all that's possible, but because all that's possible, then like Spencer and I are being introduced to the idea of VLANs and layer 3 switching and all of that. Yeah. And it's like, we don't know what we're doing.
Nope.
It's like
not at all.
No clue how to go ahead and diagnose these sorts of issues. Like we can search the internet obviously, but it's all kind of new. So that's the final thing is if you want to get into this and just use it for basically what you're doing before, great. A-okay. Everything's going to work. As soon as you start tipping your toes outside, be comfortable with the fact that you're not going to know what you're doing and that there are a lot of options that are better touched only once you do know like what they do. So something to calibrate yourself on. Yeah,
something with that is like you mentioned with the OS updates not being particularly stable sometimes. I've noticed that in their release notes, they have a comments section right in that same page where people will say like, yep, this works fine for me. And so the community around all of this equipment seems to be really good, where it's very active and vocal and saying like, yep, this is all good. Oh no, this broke for me. They've got a couple good subreddits that you could go to. So it's not like you're completely on your own per se. And like looking at Unify's documentation, people are doing the same thing that you're doing. But I mean, it's like figuring out a problem when you're coding. Like you've got to Google things and do a little research to figure it out. It's not just
there's no Stack Overflow for this, but there is a Reddit and there is a community forum on UI.com, which great domain name, by the way.
Yes.
So you're not
paid a pretty penny for that.
Oh, definitely. You're not on your own. There's like basically everyone else who uses Unity stuff is either a small business or a home nerd or like a small ISP. It's not really used in like super big enterprise stuff other than for their access points and switches apparently, but the routing stuff is not really used. So if you see reviews that say like, hey, don't use a Unify router, use a pfSense, like if you need the businessy parts that Unify does not give you, then yes, go in that direction.
Sure.
But if you are someone who does not want to have a broken network, go with the Unify stuff, because for the most part, it's going to be foolproof. At the very least, the defaults are foolproof. So that is something like I saw during my research, is a bunch of people saying like, hey, don't use the Unify Dream Machine. I don't recommend it to my clients. And their clients are 1,000+ employee organizations. Yeah. So that is a very different thing than me. And most of those people do have clarifying videos that do go into why they don't recommend it. It's like, well, for the VPN, you don't have a site-to-site VPN. It's like, I don't need site-to-site VPN. Check next. What's the next thing? And then at the end, they say like, well, why might you want to use it? It's like, well, there's a whole bunch of reasons that I agree with. So that is something that validates at least my own thinking for my use case. So something to get into. Like, I foresee the fact that I might need multiple WANs in the future. One for a business line, one for a personal, like, regular line. So that's why I got the thing with 2 WAN ports. Spencer may not need a business line, so he got the little one that just has an access point built in, and as a result of that, is way cheaper and easier to like plug in. Does not use nearly as much space, and you get an access point out of that. So get the devices that you need. Nice thing is it's all modular. You can replace. If you don't need 10 gigabit now and you need it later, don't get 10 gigabit now. Get a smaller switch. You can resell these. Like they are a hot constrained commodity at the moment. Like, it's near impossible to get all these unless you like really like hunker down at 4 a.m. It's like, okay, what did they add? What can I nab on early access or whatnot? Don't get the early access stuff if you don't know what you're doing. Get only the regular release stuff, because the early access stuff might never come back. So you might be like, hey, I got this really cool switch that has 500 gigabit or whatever, and it's like, that switch is gone. It's barely being maintained. So something to consider.
That was a Max Review Corner.
That was our entire episode. In any case, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes go live, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buniol. That's DimitriBouniol. And we'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye. And now's the time where I share what the Agents of Chaos have done to my prized plans. So I mentioned several times that I mostly built out my network. There's one part of my network that I did not build out yet, and that is Lynn's office. So we share like offices adjacent to one another. And I wanted to get some good Wi-Fi and network port in there, so that way she can connect one of those OWC pubs and then have like at the very least Ethernet access now, and maybe 10 gigabit Ethernet once the blocks and the hubs, they like figure shit out and make it cheaper. I wanted something in her office that she can go ahead and use. It turns out that this is a little more complicated than I thought it would be, because I need to actually run a fiber cable to that part of the house. And that was just like one step. So first step, I was going to be like, okay, I'm going to do the living room first, because I know where the cables are. It's already there. I'm just basically replacing the cables. By the way, if you want to nail fiber cables to your wall and you don't know like what size they are, go and take, like, this is the size of it. It's pretty small. It's much smaller than Ethernet. So go ahead and bring an iPhone USB, like iPhone, like Lightning to USB-C, USB-A, whatever. Bring one of those cables with you to Home Depot, and then you can size match because that's the same size as these multi-mode cables. And what we settled on were the phone. Do you remember phone lines? They're those flat, like rectangular cables, usually with four copper cables in it for 2 lines on a phone system. And what we found were phone line low voltage wall staples, whatever those are called.
Yeah.
The little plastic thingies that you nail.
Has the nail and
Yeah. But it's sized for phone cables, and it turns out that's perfect for 2 fiber cables if you needed to, or just one if you just need one. So be careful also when you're going around corners. Like don't pinch. Like give it a little leeway. Make sure that the thing doesn't crumple. And what we learned in the process, have your fiber cable plugged in, because then you get a blinky light that's going to stop blinking anytime you mess up. Once you mess up, then that's that. But you don't have to continue with the installation process. Is the point.
Fair.
In any case, I found this out midway because first we wanted our living room because that's where the main switch was, and that was like an obvious place of like, hey, here's the first PoE switch, which is gonna be way over here. So I get we had 2 10 gigabit fiber DAC cables, which use fiber in between. One was intended for the office, one was intended for the living room. They're both 20 meters, so fairly long. And I go like unwinding it because of course it's coiled, so it's going to be like a twisty mess, and if you pull that will kink. So wanted to get that elongated. So got that elongated, started plugging it in to make sure that things work as a basic rule of thumb, and then start like going behind my TV and getting that all like wired up. And as I'm doing that, I hear, "Kita, no!" It turns out the agents of chaos have come out once again. And have taken this beautiful cable, which let's see if I can find where the chaos happened. Found it. It's right here that the chaos has happened. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you get a look. If you're on a podcast, you just get to see, hear it. But basically, I have a very disconnected piece of fiber where it's only the inner sheathing that's kind of holding it together. The 2 fiber connections that are inside of this are very, very small. And they have both been cut. So there are other parts where there are bite marks. So I didn't know it was cut initially. So I'm like, quick, let me get electrical tape just to hold it in place. It's not gonna. There's no electrical part of this. It's all with light. So I use electrical tape to like hold it in place as much as possible before it like further frayed. Turns out it was too late. Plugged both pieces in. No light. So yeah, that's a downside of this. You can, when you plug it in, see like 2 little blinkies. So that's a fun part of a fiber cable, is you get see little blinkies. But yeah, long story short, they have destroyed a $50 cable, which plus $15 of shipping comes out to like a $70 cable, which is ironic because I could have got 2 of these modules that accept a LC fiber cable, which is essentially this part with a plug. And I could have, and the plug basically goes directly to the little LEDs that blinky. I could have gotten just the modules, not a direct attach cable, and then separately ordered a cable to the exact length that I need. And the cable would have been like $5 to $10. And the modules would have been together about like $40. So, long story short, I could have spent a similar amount of money on like the individual pieces of this and come out way ahead, but I did not, and I did not for the reorder. So I had a spare because I was going to use one for Lynn's office, so I used that for the living room. We put the cats both away during that process. They're meowing up a storm. No. But they had a lot of fun chewing on this. So yeah, that's how a $50 cable accident happened.
Bummer.
Yeah, when we were doing the 25 gigabit cable, I'm like, okay, I am not unwinding this. We are unwinding it. Lynn, you are the unwinder. You just spin around in a circle every time you unwind a thing, and that will do the same thing. And you're holding in your hands, and I am like very close to you, and there's no like that way we didn't have to lock the cats up. But we like very carefully did it. And every time there's like a corner, I'm like, or every time I miss with the hammer and I hit the cable, I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't mess it up, did I? I quickly go and like, Lynn, go back to the thing, plug it in. Do you see blinkies? And that's how we installed fiber. So if you have like a conduit and stuff like that, do that route and like build your house with fiber, because that would be awesome, because then you don't need to replace those cables ever again. And then that is like the ideal. You can just put whatever size switch and whatever size modules that get cheaper over time. Not at all a problem. But if you're doing it this is all kind of temporary, so I'm just gonna get pre-cut, pre-terminated. I don't need to figure anything out. But I do have cats, so if you have cats, they're gonna want to chewy on the cable that you're installing as you're stapling into the wall. So do keep that in mind.
Did you put it like along the baseboard?
Yeah. So it's
so are
right...
they gonna be able to chew on it?
No, so it's very close to the wall. It's very close to the wall. There are a few points where it's like elbows out a little, and I'm hoping for the best. But yeah,
you just see your network go down one day, and you're like, I know what happened.
that happened again. I guess if it happens a third time, that's probably when I'll get the LC cables directly. And then that'll be less of a concern. But yeah, it's a sad occurrence. So
that's a big old bummer.
I know you can splice fiber cables, but like I looked on the inside of these sheaths, because it's just a sheath that's there to protect it. The actual cable is like less than half a millimeter, like very, very tiny. And like I guess if I have a magnifying glass and then an X-Acto knife, I can cut diagonals on each side and then like put them very close and then put a little super glue or something. And if I get it just right, then it would work. Yeah, I don't have the other ends of the cables, unfortunately, to test with like a flashlight to see if like you can see the light that you've like done the slicing correctly.
That'd be cool.
So, yeah, it might be dead end for this particular cable, but
rip.
Yeah. So that's my warning to anyone wanting to install fiber with cats. Like they're a lot easier to chew through than Ethernet cables, put it that way, which they're more or less uninterested in. They love my lightning cables at the bedside. I used to just leave those like hang off the edge, but now I'm like they're tightly bound behind my pillow and stuff like that. So there's like nothing hanging for the morning. So cats, fluffy little monsters.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.